Hey there, quilty friends. It's Carolina Moore, your favorite sewing and quilting YouTuber. And today we're going to talk about half square triangles and quarter square triangles. What's the difference and how you make both of them. You ready? Let's get started. To start us off, I have a package of 10-inch fabric wonders. So these are the pre-cut 10-inch fabric pieces from Art Gallery Fabrics. They make them for all their lines. So these are their great pre-cut packs. You can find pre-cut packs at most quilt shops. And the great thing about pre-cut packs is that you get a variety of fabrics in the pre-cut pack. So let me show you from the top. You get all different kinds of fabrics. Depending on the line, you might get a couple of the same fabric in there. Now, the reason that there are multiples of certain fabrics in different pre-cut packs that you get is because you want a consistent number of 10-inch squares in all your packs, so that if this one, you can't get access to this one, or this one isn't the one that you love, that you can go find another pre-cut pack and it'll still have the right number of squares. So 42 squares in the 10-inch fabric wonders, and that will get you a lot of projects actually. But today we're going to do half squares and quarter squares. So I'm going to grab a dark fabric, and let me pick a light. This one. There we go. I'm going to pick a dark fabric and a light fabric, and we're going to put these two together to make our half square triangle. So once we've picked out our two fabrics, the first step is to draw a diagonal line on the back. So you just take your ruler and you go from point to point and you draw a diagonal line. Now there's lots of different kinds of pens that you can use for drawing your line. Friction pens are really popular. You want to know that though these are erasable, what that really does is it turns the ink like a waxy white color, and the ink can come back. So totally fine for putting lines on the backs of things if it won't bleed through, but you never want to use a friction pen on the front of a quilt. This is a mechanical pencil that's actually a chalk pencil. This has white lead in it, so it'd be great on the other side if I wanted to do lines on a darker fabric. And this is a standard ballpoint pen. I would not recommend using ballpoint ink on your quilts. Mechanical pencils are usually fine, but a ballpoint ink pen is not a great idea. So we don't want to go with the ballpoint ink pen, but these options would be fine. I'm going to go ahead and use the friction pen because it'll have a nice dark color on my light fabric. I have my diagonal line on my fabric, and now I can turn this into two half square triangles. What you want to do is sew a 1/4 inch from either side of that line, and then we're going to cut down that line, and that's going to give us two half square triangles. So we'll take it over to the sewing machine, and I have my 1/4 inch foot on here. So I'm just going to put the edge of the 1/4 inch foot up against that line, and I'm going to sew. I've sewn on one side. I'm just going to flip it around and go ahead and sew on the other side. I have my diagonal line. I've sewn a 1/4 inch from each side, and now I can take my ruler and just cut this right on the line. You have that line, so you could also cut this with scissors. Lots of options here. And I open it up, and you've got one half square triangle, two half square triangles. And while they look opposite right now, just turn it, and now you have two identical half square triangles. Now these will go ahead and get pressed. In this case, I would press towards the dark, but you would press in whatever direction that your pattern tells you to. And that's making half square triangles. Half square triangles are one of the foundational blocks or units that we use when making quilts. Now, 1/4 square triangles actually start off with half square triangles. So let's go ahead and start by making some half square triangles in order to make our 1/4 square triangles. All right, so I've stitched up the half square triangle units that I need to make my quarter square triangle. But before I go to the next step of making the quarter square triangle, I have to press my half square triangle units. And so I'm just going to go ahead and take my iron and press these towards the dark. And you'll see I've moved my cutting mat out of the way because I've discovered that putting my pressing mat on top of my cutting mat is a really fast way to ruin a cutting mat. And I learned this by ruining actually a couple different cutting mats. So it only took a couple cutting mats, but I have absolutely learned my lesson. All right, so I need one of each of 2 different colors. And for both of these, I'm just pressing the fabric to the dark. So we have 2 different half square triangles. By the way, you can do 2 of the same half square triangle. It's going to make an hourglass shape unit, but this is doing with 2 different half square triangles. And that way you'll see the full effect of the quarter square triangle unit. To turn these half square triangle units into quarter square triangle units, what I need to do is put them right sides together. And I press both towards the dark. So the bottom dark I'm going to have up, and this top dark I'm going to have going the other direction. And that's going to allow me to nest these seams together, which should give me a really pretty point here in the middle after I've sewn this all together. And now I'm going to take my ruler, and you can do this before stacking them on top of each other. I'm just doing it after, and you'll draw your diagonal line. So I have my diagonal line right on here, and we're going to do the same thing as before, sewing a 1/4 inch on either side of the diagonal line. And if it helps you to put a pin in here so that your pieces don't shift, you can absolutely do that. Now we've sewn on either side, and you can actually already take a peek at your quarter square triangles and see how you did on lining up those points. Those actually look really good. So now I'm going to cut this on the diagonal line. And there's your quarter square triangle. We're going to go ahead and give this one a press. And when we press, we're going to spin our seams. So this one up, this one down, spin in that direction. So you'll see that in this case, all the seams are going counterclockwise. And that should pop open this middle right here and make a cute little 4 patch in the middle. Okay, so I have my half square triangle and I have my quarter square triangle, but we haven't talked about what size these are because I started out with 10-inch squares. So do I have a 10-inch half square triangle and a 10-inch quarter square triangle? I mean, that wouldn't make sense because I did put a 1/4 inch seam allowance in here. So does that mean that it's a 1/4 inch smaller, or is it a 1/2 inch smaller because it's a 1/4 inch on each piece? Or, well, it's on the diagonal, so it's not a 1/4 inch across. All right, don't worry about any of those questions because we're just going to give you an answer right now. So the measurement that we use when making a half square triangle is that total we're going to lose 7/8 of an inch. There is 3/8 of an inch that goes into this diagonal seam allowance, and then there's a 1/2 inch that goes into the seam allowances on the side. So once this is finished in a quilt, if I wanted to make it big, if I sewed it all perfect and I made it as big as I possibly could from a 10-inch square, finished in a quilt, it would be 9 1/8 inch, which is a really awkward size, right? So I can now square this up to 9.5 inches, and then it'll be 9 inches in the quilt, and that'll be actually a normal size. So I'll grab my square up ruler. This is a 10-inch square from Missouri Star, and you can see, especially if I put the block on top of it, that I've lost some here. So if I wanted to make this as big as I possibly can, here we go. I'm going to take this long diagonal line and put it on the diagonal seam. And I'm going to be able to trim off just the bare edges on this. And then this time, I'm gonna line up that diagonal seam right along here. And I'm lining up the 9.5 inch line here and the 9.5 inch line here. Go. And now I have a beautifully squared up 9.5 inch square. There'll be 9 inches once it's in the quilt, because once it's in the quilt, I'll lose a 1/4 inch on all sides. So what about my quarter square triangle? How much fabric am I going to lose, or how much is this going to shrink from that 10 inch square that I started with once I make a quarter square triangle? Well, it's a 1/4 inch on all sides, so that's my 1/2 inch. It's 3/8 inches from one diagonal seam. It's 3/8 inches from the other diagonal seam. So 3/8 inches plus 3/8 inches is 6/8 inches, plus a 1/2 inch is 4 more eighths. So that's a total of 10/8. And if you didn't follow that math, don't worry about it, because the answer is 1 1/4. So if I start out with a 10 inch square, finished, it's going to be 1 1/4 inches smaller. There'll be 8 3/4 inches in the finished quilt. But again, that's kind of a weird size. So it's easier to go to 8.5 inches in the finished quilt, and we square this up to 9 inches. So all the rest of that was nonsense, which is fine. For a 10 inch square, when you're making quarter square triangles, just trim them up to 9 inches, and they'll be 8.5 inches finished in the quilt. So let's go ahead and trim this one up as well. This ruler is my ruler. These will be out very, very soon. And this is the glow ruler, which allows me to see all my lines really, really well. And so if I'm squaring this up to 9 inches, 1/2 of 9 is 4.5. So I want my I want my diagonal line here, and my 4.5 inch line right here in the middle. And that should bring my 9 inch line right here to the edge. There we go. And now when I flip this back around, I'll be able to line up my squared up edges with the 9 inch lines on my glow ruler. And there we go. I have a 9 inch block that'll finish up at 8.5 inches when it's in the quilt. All right, friends, there you go. That's half square triangles and quarter square triangles. Now you know the difference, how they're made, and how to do the math if you want to be able to get them all squared up. Friends, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments, leave those down below. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. If you're not subscribed, I don't know what you're waiting for. Lots of people have already subscribed, and we'd love for you to join us. Friends, that's it for today. I'll see you right here real soon. Bye for now.